We are ahead of Neptune moving into Aries at the end of March. This is going to be a 14-year cycle in Aries and then a 165-year cycle in the whole zodiacal wheel. The unique thing is that Neptune will also be conjunct Saturn at 0 degrees Aries. That's going to happen in 2025, in June, July. They're going to come very close, not touch, but very close. And then in February 2026 at 0 Aries, this is the inception degree. Now, Saturn has to do with structures, right? Neptune has to do with the need to touch the people, the need to bring whatever the energies are to the greater whole. It spiritualizes the nature, of the times. However, sometimes what ends up happening is that it disrupts the power structures and can create a situation where what seemed reliable, Saturn, can become weakened, softened. It erodes the rock. The water of Neptune erodes the rock of Saturn. And that can lead to a feeling that there's nobody, there's nothing to lean on, that leadership is not reliable. A feeling basically that systems are collapsing. And we can see that back in the 1989, 1990, the last time it was in Capricorn. That was the end of the apartheid regime in South Africa and the rise of Nelson Mandela. It was also, of course, the end, the collapse, the disintegration of the Soviet bloc, of a house of cards collapsing. So we can expect structures to dissolve during this time, and we can expect leaders to fall. Now, some of the leaders will come as heroes. Some of the leaders will lose their credibility. This is a time where scandals can emerge and a feeling that there's nobody to trust, that what was once solid, what was once reliable becomes, like a quicksand. It's losing its integrity. Now, if we look back at the transits of Neptune through the signs, I want to take you on a short journey to understand the principles. Now, I have presented recently a workshop on Neptune through the signs. And it was a really fascinating research. And of course, sharing this with the group was very inspiring. And I recommend that you do get, this recording. It's a 4.5 hour session, and it's only $40. You can get, more sessions about Neptune as we celebrate Neptune in this transition in Aries. Or if you don't have the budget or you can't do it, just at least get this one, because it's going to teach you a lot and it's going to prepare you for very important times ahead. We are ahead of a new world order. Now, wherever Neptune moves in, there's a sense that it brings that kind of collapse. And the reason is that it disrupts the power structures in order to bring actually more, I would say, opportunities or more resources to the whole. So whoever tries to control the narrative, whoever tries to, like I said, own the truth, risks basically collapsing, falling down. So in 1928, when Neptune moved into Virgo, is when we had the Great Depression, the stock market crash. And that affected the whole world. This Great Depression led to Virgo unemployment. And so the sign of Virgo has to do with work, but with Neptune, it brings a collapse of the work structure. And yet, as everything is in shambles, who rises are actually women, women getting out of the kitchen and into the workforce because families need a supplemental income. They can't rely on one income anymore. And so women get out and work. Later on, men go to war because it's World War II by the end of the 1939. And that also keeps women in the workforce. And that's the paradox of where Neptune goes, is that it creates this kind of collapse. And in this reshuffling, it actually empowers the people, those who were disenfranchised. Now, in Libra, we had a very interesting theme, obviously, of polarities and relationships. In the video, I get into all the social structures that were built and dismantled. This was a time of the World War II on the one hand, but it was also the time of the UN being created. And then the Cold War splitting the world into East and Western Bloc. And that again, led to this, I would say, extremes that is very typical to Libra. In 1960s, that is when everything got edgier. The music moved from a very romantic type of music from, swing and jazz to the rock sound and later punk sound. And a lot of psychedelics, were inspiring musicians. But that's when you had the bands like the Rolling Stones and the Beatles and the edgier sound, which obviously was part also of the movement of anti-war, anti-Vietnam War, and flower power, flower Neptune, power Scorpio, the sexual revolution. But interestingly, and I want to bring that to your attention, is that as the hippies movement and grows and people in a very scorpionic way um feel sexually liberated after decades of a lot of taboos around sexuality, Neptune dissolves the structure and allows people to experiment through their sexuality. This also led eventually, to the women's liberation movement, at least reinforced it, because that's also when the pill was introduced and women could, use contraception and not have to associate sexuality with motherhood. Sexuality was freed from, getting pregnant. This is also when um, the no-fault divorce was introduced, which means that you could divorce without blaming the other, just irreconcilable differences, which basically means that it wasn't because anyone cheated, it wasn't because there was domestic violence, it was simply because we didn't get along. And so this led to a massive transformation culturally. But the backlash was that the conservative people, seeing people, experimenting sexually and women, wearing mini skirts suddenly and sleeveless skirts and, the hippies movement basically fighting war as well, protesting war led to a conservative backlash. And that's when President Nixon in the United States was elected. And he represented the old model, the need to kind of, return to the ethics and the taboos and the good old ways, so to speak. So the fast change that Neptune brought can lead to a panic, because when you collapse, when the system collapses, people feel like orphans. There's a sense that we are not um, on solid ground. That was also the time not only of a sexual liberation movement, but of the civil rights movement, where African American in the United States could finally, have more justice and no discrimination and no segregation. So think about all these development and the backlash of returning to um, to the conservative movement when Saturn in 1968 got into Aries. Lincoln was elected, and he was, pro-war, and like we said, very old school. Now let's zoom forward and what happens in the following season with Neptune in Sagittarius is that there's a rise of atheism. People wanting to question religion. So again, a collapse, Neptune, of the religious institutions. And it was also the rise of the New Age. New Age, where people were, finding their own spirituality. So again, the power structure is shaken here in Sagittarius. It's the religious institutions, but people are empowered by finding their own spirituality without a priest and without a church or a temple. And that, of course, upsets those who were in power. And that is when you have, with this growing movement of individual spirituality, you had the church becoming more and more politicized and associating the United States more and more so with the Republican Party. So that association of church and politics grew particularly during the 70s and early 80s. This was also the rise of fundamentalism in Iran with the Islamic Revolution taking place, which shows again that the secular movement is on the one hand, growing, but the panic, the backlash leads to extremists trying to reclaim their power. Now, I want to take you fast forward to Neptune in Pisces, where we are at now in this threshold. Neptune has been in Pisces since 2012. This is when the climate crisis became really the talk of the main agenda, many elections. You had the Kyoto Protocol, and you had later the Paris agreements to try to change industry and save the planet. This is also when you had Pisces represent the victim, the disenfranchised, the people. So you had disruption of power structures, and the simple people, those who were again discriminated against, could find their voice. And so this is when you had the Me Too movement, when women exposed the biggest powerful man in Hollywood. And because they abused their powers, they were, they lost their credibility, they lost their position. And you had, again, a complete reshuffling and destabilization of power. So it was kind of an inversion of the pyramid where those who were on top are falling down and those who were at the bottom can now, get a voice and speak up. And the same thing happened with Black Lives Matter, with, particularly, through George Floyd's murder. But even before that, there were incidents with Trayvon Martin and other, incidents of police brutality that led to the need to change the structure, and basically bring social justice. Now, compare this to the 1960s, where you also had some kind of Black Lives Matter through the civil rights movement, and you also had women becoming more vocal and asserting their rights and not wanting to be bullied by, the bosses, male dominating society. And yet you had the backlash when Saturn moved into Aries, end of Pisces into Aries, and Richard Nixon winning the election and trying to turn back the clock. And here with Neptune in Pisces, you had, the sexual revolution of the gay right, gay marriage, and then transgender rights, which ended up scaring the shit, pardon my French, the shit out of people in position of power. And just as Saturn now moves into Aries, you have a backlash and a panic that leads to the reemergence of Donald Trump as a leader. And, the whole system is basically now trying to dismantle everything that was done during the Neptune in Pisces era. Reverse climate policies, reverse um, uh, diversity consciousness in the workplace, reverse, women's right for abortion, which was, again, think about the contraception of the pill in the 1960s, and think about now the abortion controversies. And of course, reversing all the transgender rights. And so this is part of Neptune in Pisces hitting a panic moment, especially as it's at the tail end of the cycle. And, there's a reaction to it. Another expression of the backlash and panic with Neptune in Pisces is a new concept now referred to as the sin of empathy. You've heard it right. Empathy is perceived by the Christian right as a sin. And this was floating around for quite a while, apparently, but it really came to surface when, after the inauguration of Trump, um, Bishop Marian Dube, I think is her name, uh, invoked compassion for the immigrants and minorities and people who are in vulnerable positions. And so she felt it appropriate to kind of speak to his heart, maybe make a difference. And that kind of unleashed a reaction in the Christian right that empathy can be toxic, that empathy can be manipulative. And of course it can. I mean, people, can abuse anything. But the fact that the Christian right, who are worshiping, Jesus, speak about empathy in reference to a sin is really such an illustration of Neptune in Pisces representing empathy, representing care for the disenfranchised, and yet seeing it as something that needs to be um, condemned. Then Elon Musk went on an interview with Joe Rogan and went on to say that empathy is the greatest threat to Western civilization. I'm not making this up. Like, out of all that is happening, right? Diseases, corruption, abuse. What is going to be the greatest threat to civilization? It's empathy. So that is Neptune in Pisces backlash, because all through the years from 2011 into 2024, when Neptune progressed through Pisces, the theme of having more empathy was indeed, something that again reversed the pyramid and put people who are in vulnerable position, people who've been abused, people who have been invisible, to give them a voice. And so the need to kind of turn things around leads to this, very graphic attack on the values that Neptune in Pisces represents. And this also, manifested through the first thing that Musk attacked in his campaign to bring, so to speak, efficiency. He dismantled what? Big pharma? No. Big corporations? No. Excessive White House dinner that cost $1 million to save money? No. He went to a humanitarian organization, USAID, which provides support, resources, programs for very vulnerable populations around the world, and dismantled it. So his first target to fight abuse and corruption was actually a humanitarian organization. So this is all symbolic. It's not a coincidence that this all happens during Neptune in Pisces on the North Node, when people who cannot feel empathy are basically lost in this transit. They don't know what to make of it. And that is not to say that fighting corruption is a bad thing, or that efficiency, is not required in many offices and functions. But the symbolism of how it's done and where it is channeled is, for us astrologers, very revealing. And think about, um, how Nixon ended, and so we'll see what happens to Trump. But I just want to show these parallels in history, in recent history, to understand how things are basically repeating, with Neptune being in a water sign, Scorpio then, and Pisces now, and now Saturn moving into Aries, and the need to kind of reclaim male dominion. Now, we're not in a battle here between the sexes, but they make it so. Elon Musk said, we need to allow men with high IQ to be the ones to vote. So he basically floated the ideas that who should be allowed to vote? Men with high IQs and testosterone. So now as we move into Neptune in Aries, and again with Saturn also in Aries, we have questions about sovereignty. You know, what will happen to the balance of power? What will happen to healthy masculinity versus toxic masculinity? What will happen to art, you know, during this age? And of course, Aries has to do with defense and has to do with weapons. And we're talking, you know, expanding for a whole good hour and a half on Neptune being in Aries. But just think about the fact that the NRA, the National Rifle Association, was founded in the previous cycle of Neptune in Aries. Also contemplate on the fact that in 1860, when Neptune got into Aries, 1861, the Civil War began in the United States. What does that mean? What was the meaning of the Civil War? The United States has its IC, the bottom of the chart, at 1 degrees Aries. So this conjunction of Saturn, Neptune is right on the IC of the United States. And that's why it creates this feeling of quicksand. Back then, in 1861, it unfortunately, you know, led to, you know, a battle. So will we need to recreate this battle? What will happen to our energy supply? What are the liberation battle? How do we reclaim our sovereignty? So I hope this inspires you to understand the patterns of Neptune through the signs. You know, and I didn't go into the Aquarius and the Capricorn. There's a lot that happened then. So I invite you to check this workshop out. You can scan, you know, this barcode, this QR code, and get to the page. You have a whole series of talks on Neptune, and this is one of them. So you can get the whole series, 4 talks, and you can get this only one. It's just $40, and you won't regret it. Now, another goodie is that coming up on the equinox, which happens to also be the celebration of Astrology Day, we're having a free event that will be also about Neptune in Aries and about the equinox chart. The equinox chart is used to make predictions for the year. So 17 astrologers, you know, presenting short presentations. It's a festival, you know, it's a celebration. Go to my website, you will see the banner, Astrology Day, events, and you'll be able to register. This one is free. How fun. And of course, if you want to take your astrology seriously on Astrology Day, this is the time to also join a more comprehensive study. So I invite you to really take astrology more seriously and master this craft. It's easy to learn bits and pieces online, but think about the fact that with Pluto in Aquarius and Neptune in Aries, astrology is going to gain prominence. And it's not necessarily to become a professional. It's a tool, it's a language that will serve you in managing your own life, for your own growth, and for your own health. So not everyone is meant to become a professional astrologer, But I do believe that everyone should have some foundations because it is such a powerful and useful tool. It's the same as driving a car. Everyone drives a car. Not everybody has to be a mechanic. You know, that's kind of the analogy. So see if there are programs that suits you, and I invite you to, um, yeah, celebrate astrology and Neptune in Aries. Thank you. Until next time.